The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
We are here on Titans of Decoupling Energy's Impact with Dr. Chris Keefer. Our combined efforts from my, I know I blow smoke up your ass all the time, but you actually are my favorite podcast host. So it's always a pleasure to have you back on our show.
Brett, it's great to be back with you as well. It's been too long. I'm sure we have a lot to catch each other up on.
Yeah, well, I cannot wait to hear about what you've been up to. I mean, incredible. What a tide shift has happened in this last year. First of all, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I've literally been pinching myself for the last 6 days. On September 29th, we celebrated what will forever be known now as Pickering Day. We've seen, a number of great victories recently. It was wonderful watching our allies in California save Diablo Canyon.
And I want to talk about that. I've been meaning to have you to talk to you about that because I want to know actually how saved is saved, but please continue because that was like a nice little victory to begin, but then this kind of thing is unbelievable also.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's better people to speak to about Diablo. I'll maybe get Heather Hoff on or something like that. But, we've been working hard against the odds to save our Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, which is 15% of Ontario's electricity, one of the sort of three crown jewels of these massive nuclear plants we built in the 70s and 80s and 90s here in Ontario, where we would put, 8 CANDUs next to each other. And it was a real long uphill battle. We were told by everybody that it wasn't achievable, that it wasn't worth our time, that we were beating a dead horse, that it wasn't good for nuclear, that it was not good for nuclear to try and fight for this plant and get it refurbished.
Why? Okay, can we actually pause there for a second and dig into that? Why? I can imagine people saying that because people rationalize and say all sorts of bizarre stuff. But why were they saying that?
I'm going to try and be as charitable as I can, right? Because, I really am careful. I don't think there's any kind of malice or anything behind that. I just think that, a lot of folks have become pretty enamored with sort of an SMR future. And there's definitely a role for SMRs, don't get me wrong. But there was an idea that Pickering was kind of like an anchor, maybe weighing down the boat as it heads into the future, that diverting resources to it might divert away from SMRs, that there's some kind of a zero-sum game.
So crazy. Especially given the amount of clean energy that we need. That's just oh, man.
Well, we had a similar reaction to you, Brett, but we were, we're a rare breed. These kind of dogged nuclear advocates, in whose company we find ourselves.
Dogged nuclear advocates, you mean nuclear bros, as the Wall Street Journal is calling you these days.
Yeah, Washington Post. That was a great.
Sorry.
No, and that was Washington Post, right? Usually, I was told to expect that this article may not go the way I was hoping it would go. I had a great connection with the author, Shannon Osaka. I was actually really happy with that piece. And it's nice to kind of reappropriate that term. We can talk about that as well. But just to wrap up the Pickering thoughts, a very long, hard-fought campaign that felt completely hopeless in the beginning. I've said before that, tying your arguments as an advocate towards an existing piece of nuclear infrastructure that it's about to be shut down. I mean, that's such a crime, such an act of civilizational and climate vandalism. It's a potent thing to argue for. And so in the earliest days of the Save Pickering fight, we kind of had psychologically prepared ourselves that it wasn't going to happen, but we'd still fight for it because it made for, a better way to frame an argument around nuclear energy than just theoretically talking about nuclear is great, when you can say, actually, no, it's going to be closed, replaced by gas. Our air quality is going to go to shit. Our grid's going to get a lot dirtier. It's actually going to get a lot more expensive because of the price of gas, all sorts of different reasons. And this uphill battle, where we were sort of the lone champions of this, ended up being won in the end. And I mean, I don't want to go on a long diatribe as to how that happened. I'll let you kind of interject a few questions along the way, but it's so exciting. The news is a life extension for a year. And that doesn't sound like too much to write home about. But the really exciting part is that the Ontario government, who is the sole shareholder of Ontario Power Generation, who owns and operates the plant, has directed them apparently quite enthusiastically to pursue a reanalysis of the refurbishment of that plant. As your listeners may or may not know, CANDUs have a 60 to 80 year lifespan at least, but that requires a midlife refurbishment at 30 to 40 years. Pickering did receive a regulator approved plan to do that refurbishment back in 2009. Our government at the time decided that wasn't worth pursuing. So we've got a very pro-nuclear government now, and they've made a really important and historic choice, which what I'm saying is this makes Ontario the most pro-nuclear political jurisdiction, I think, in the Western world.
Amazing. Truly amazing. And I didn't even realize, maybe this is just ignorant of me, but I didn't even realize you were still fighting for that specific plan, because I also thought it was like a lost cause or something.
Yeah.
But you are dogged. It's incredible.
It's obviously, it takes I posted about this. It takes a village to save a nuclear plant. There was a really important team that was involved. I think it's important. I think it's interesting to kind of break that down. What are the ingredients? How to save a nuclear plant? We need a little instruction manual. It's looking like it's getting easier and easier as it becomes incredibly more nonsensical to shut these things down. Obviously, still got battles to fight in Europe on this.
Can you walk me through your playbook, both generically but also for Pickering? Like, what literally happened? And literally, I want to know, what does it take to save a plant? Do you have the formula? Is it you get 20 of your friends together on day 1 to hold signs, and then on day 30 you write to your congressman? What is it? What's the playbook?
Yeah, obviously it's going to be tailored to each individual plant, the society in which that plant exists, the role it plays on the grid, etc. A few commonalities, though, is you definitely need a group of absolute diehard, determined, dogged activists, and you see that with the victories at Byron and Dresden. You see that in Diablo Canyon. You very much see that in Pickering. I think another key element is having some kind of a policy report. There's a famous quote from Milton Friedman that I'm going to butcher, but essentially, when crisis strikes, politicians are, they kind of throw their hands in the air and they reach around for the ideas that are available to them. They're easily available. And it's a time when really, new and different ideas, insurgent ideas can sometimes find their way into policy. We spent about 9 months writing a beautiful, detailed policy report. And when I say we, Dylan Moon of Nuclear Vision was our kind of lead strategist on this, authored it and did a lot of the work, directing the whole team to get it laid out and just beautiful. So having a report, I know at Diablo Canyon as well, they had a scientific report by a number of scientists, which Gavin Newsom sort of used as a justification to some of his environmental base as to why Diablo Canyon had to be saved. So that is very important. Having committed activists that will just absolutely never give up. There's a component certainly of labor in this. That was big in Byron and Dresden, and huge here in Ontario. I think globally we're really seeing a resurgence of, a realignment. There's a right-wing kind of populist frame that's we're seeing kind of replicated all over the world. And there's a really interesting phenomenon. There's a political scientist named Thomas Piketty. He talks about something he calls the Brahmin left. Brahmins, for those not familiar with the Indian caste system, are very elite sector of that society. And he says that the way that voting used to work, you'd have a kind of left wing or Labor Party, and they'd get the votes of Labor, right? And then the elite, the 1%, and the highly educated would vote for, the right wing or conservative parties. We've seen a real shift where the folks that vote for left-wing parties are now the educated, generally urban elite, and those voting for more right-wing parties are working people and the 1%. It's a strange kind of realignment of forces here. There's a lot at play, a lot of cultural, culture war issues at play. There's a lot of reasons why that's happened.
And we're seeing this around the world.
We really are, yeah. And in Ontario, that playbook has occurred as well. Where in this election in particular, an incumbent conservative government, that went through the pandemic, which was a challenging time for a lot of governments, managed to actually secure an even stronger supermajority mandate in their second term. And the way they did it was very much appealing to not the entire, not all of labor. Certainly the public sector unions are not happy with this government, and the government isn't making huge, they're actively pissing them off. But with skilled labor, the folks that shower after work, maybe before and after, right? And so there was a really interesting alignment that occurred in this election where private sector skilled trades unions started to endorse a conservative government, which is, really unprecedented. And that's partially because this particular government has an agenda of being open for business and building things, whether it's, highways or trying to remove red tape to build housing. This is all nuanced and controversial. I'm not a partisan person. I'm not a government hack for this government. Certainly, there's allegations that, part of this, agenda of, building stuff might involve, destroying our green belt or being too friendly with, developers and things like that. But suffice it to say, skilled tradespeople are seeing themselves more in this conservative government as a government that's going to get things built, essentially. And that's a real failure of the political left. But as a result, not to get too much into a big politics lesson, I think Labor gained a lot of traction and a lot of power to potentially steer an agenda. This beautiful report that we'd put together ended up getting passed along to the government, via some friends in Labor. I've spent 2 years really building relationships with friends in unions and in the labor movement, and those connections really paid off. The report got delivered to the highest levels of government. This crisis struck. Our independent electricity systems operator released a report saying, oops, our bad. We actually are forecasting an enormous increase in demand, and Pickering coming offline is going to leave it at risk for brownouts. And so the report landed and apparently was well received by the government. And a couple months later, we have this announcement, which, was a shock to many, many, many people. I'd started to see it coming as I started getting certain bits of intel here and there that, oh, wow, we're certainly going to get a life extension. But then this announcement of the exploration of refurbishment was just sort of beyond my, it wasn't beyond my wildest expectations or dreams, but I certainly was very, very pleased that it occurred.
Yeah, no, amazing. So let's walk through the timeline together. Actually, how much power do these units produce?
So these are 500 megawatt reactors. They're the smaller version of the CANDU.
Pickering?
There's 8. 6 of them are currently operating. 2 of them have been mothballed.
Does mothballed mean that they are resurfaceable, or I don't know how you? I
mean, potentially. The way we built CANDUs again was we'd build 4 packs. And so there was Pickering A, which has 4 units brought online between 1971 and 1974, I believe. And Pickering B, 1983 to 86. And so those older units on the A side, 2 of them have actually already been refurbished. So we know Pickering can be refurbished, right? Yeah. And the argument that we put forward is that we should refurbish the B side units. So then again, the whole station, all 6 of those reactors puts out about 3.1 gigawatts, 3,100 megawatts, or 21 to 24 terawatt hours every year. For those familiar with kind of North American geography and who know about the Great Lakes and just how much water power there is, Pickering puts out more power than all of the Canadian hydroelectric facilities at Niagara Falls, one of the largest, waterfalls in the world. And Pickering also puts out more than 2 times all of the grid-connected wind and solar contracts. We have 3,273 of these contracts, which, whose price tag in subsidies will end up being something like $60 billion over their 40-year contract lifespans. Pickering produces double that, and it produces power when we need it, not power that gets curtailed or sold at negative prices to the U.S. And we estimate that refurbishment is going to cost about $10 billion, or 1/6 of all of that. So just to give the listeners a bit of a context about how mighty Pickering is, it's incredible. I've visited the plants. I haven't been inside yet, but it's similar to any nuclear plant. The power density is insane. It's on the footprint of a Costco, a large Costco essentially, and
Yep.
basically powers Canada's largest city.
One building for 1 million people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just so crazy. Listen, I think most of our audience is continuously enamored by like the incredible power of nuclear. Let's get through some of these logistics. So I want to get a real sense of like what's going to happen when. So schedule. So when were they going to be shut down? From what year to what year does the life extension occur? And then how much time do they have to plan to do like a real life extension?
So the plant is licensed to 2028. It's been scheduled to be closed actually several times. We didn't know how long CANDUs would last for when they were designed by the engineers who came up with the brilliant design. Arbitrarily, it was thought, I think engineers just tend to pick sort of 30 to 40 years when they design new technologies. And so that's kind of what was thought. Obviously, we've learned that we can refurbish them. The rate limiting factor in a CANDU is we don't have a pressure vessel, but that equivalent, which is called the pressure tubes. The Pickering reactors have 380 pressure tubes, which carry that pressurized heavy water off to the steam generators. And those pressure tubes are what age over time and need to be replaced. Interestingly, because Pickering is a smaller reactor, and I guess I'm no reactor physicist, but there's less neutron flux, I'm told, its pressure tubes are aging the slowest in the entire fleet. And so, again, that B side is coming up on sort of 40 years of life and actually performing better than it ever has. Our capacity factors are the best they've been for that site. A site record was set where all 6 of the reactors powered for 100 full days through the summer, right through our peak demand season. Pickering set a world record that was broken later on by another CANDU site, Darlington, but operating for 2.5 years, a run that went 2.5 years. Just to give you a little bit of context there. And so in terms of the timeline, Pickering originally was slated for closure, I believe, as early as 2012, and then 2018. It got a life extension to 2018, and then the previous Liberal government gave it an extension to 2024. And the Ford government, when they got in, gave it an extension to 2025. And now this announcement extends it 1 year further to 2026. The license from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is an operating license till 2028. And so they're going to come back.
Yeah, so why isn't then it? Maybe I'm missing something here. If the nuclear regulator is giving them a license till 2028, why isn't that the presumed lifetime of the facility? Why is there anything that would artificially cut that short?
Yeah, that didn't make sense to me either. But my understanding is that the license is for kind of all operations at the plant. So the idea is that, the decommissioning phase, defueling and everything, that would all have to be wrapped up by 2028, potentially. So the this directive to re-examine, to dust off that regulator-approved refurbishment plan, again, that happened in 2009, and look at it again, see if it's viable, check the economics, look at it technically, see how feasible it is. That's due at the end of 2023. So at that point, we'll be able to jump on, ordering the steam generators, ordering the new pressure tubes, and really going gangbusters. We have become absolute experts at refurbishment. The refurbishment is being done. Canadians, yeah. And, Bruce Power and Ontario Power Generation. At Ontario Power Generation, they've done incredible things to learn how to do this ultra efficiently. They've built a mock-up at the Darlington site, Ontario Power Generation has, of the exact, I think it's made out of plywood and stuff like this, but of the vault, of the what we call the calandria and the pressure tubes. And they have their workers go and practice on that, practice their maneuvers so they can go in and out and get the job done really quick. They're innovating all sorts of neat ways to speed up the process.
This reminds me of like the Italian Job. Do you remember that movie where they built a mock-up of the...
Yeah. And Brett, I'm a huge advocate within nuclear for the human factor side of things. I
Yeah,
think
no, you're
a lot of nuclear gets tied up in blueprints, in the imaginations of engineers. But this kind of a process where we were investing $26 billion, Canada's largest infrastructure project, in the refurbishments of all of the reactors at Darlington and all of the reactors at Bruce. It generates an incredible human capital, familiarity, troubleshooting, right? Like that's what gets devalued. I think a lot of nuclear is like, the people who actually machine the parts and then get some insight into how to do that better, or how to, remove this piece of the reactor and put it back in. That's not something that's figured out by an engineer on working on CAD or something. Like that's figured out by people getting their hands dirty. And I feel like it's high time that those people have a greater influence in helping us make our choices on what's the best way forward for nuclear. And that's a small part of I think our contribution in terms of Canadians for Nuclear Energy is we're really working alongside, because of those extensive relationships with Labor, able to bring those perspectives forward. And of course, we were told that saving Pickering was bad for nuclear. How could it be bad? I mean, we've potentially generated $10 billion for the sector to refurbish this vital clean energy asset. I don't understand how that can be bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Maybe we probably just need to stop giving the voice to people with ridiculous claims. Okay, can I pitch an idea to you, and you tell me if this is feasible or a good idea or whatever? Because as you're talking about this, I'm like, why do we even allow for this idea of a lifetime? So like a human lifetime is like something that ends, right? Okay. But like when you think of other types of institutions like trusts or universities, we actually don't think of them as having a concrete end. We think we think of them almost as institutions that will go on forever if properly cared for. Is there a construct that we can develop for nuclear power stations that we move away from this idea of they have a life, and we move to this idea of they are like a national park? They are a protected institution that gives life, right, to a community of some sort, and that must be preserved forever. And that's what we change the dialogue to. That's what we change the battlegrounds for. We say, this is so important to humanity, to society, to all the things that you mentioned, to having an educated labor force, to providing clean power, to protecting a country against energy volatility across the world. Can we create a total like paradigm rewrite where we say all nuclear power stations across the world are now forever institutions? And if we start to think about it in that lens, it's no longer, we have these lifetimes, refurbishments. We think, okay, the steam generator gets replaced every 20 years or whatever. The calandria gets replaced every 35 years. The physical roof of the building maybe gets replaced every 60 years. Okay, that's fine. They're all on different schedules. We'll time the maintenance. But let's get rid of this idea that it has an end to it.
I think that's a very interesting idea. I mean, there's limitations, for example, like the gas reactor fleet in the UK, unfortunately, just don't seem to be refurbishable because you can't access all the stuff.
Fine,
to
so
play
let's
with that.
replace the reactor, but
keep the site. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, Pickering is this
a living nuclear institution.
Yeah. Pickering, the craziness of this all was that Pickering was going to be fully decommissioned. We're going to lose an approved nuclear site, lose all of that transmission and grid connection. It takes 7 to 9 years now to work your way through this insane federal environmental impact assessment policy and procedure in order to get a new site licensed. 7 to 9 years. Who can invest in that? But I wanted to add one thing, because this was a question that came up in the press conference. A very overeager member of the press said to the Minister of Energy announcing the potential for the refurbishment, he said, I drive a 2010 Dodge Caravan. I don't think that thing should be on the road much longer. And he was making that kind of analogy that a nuclear plant's like his shitty old Dodge Caravan. And it got me thinking a little bit about what the differences are. And, it's kind of like, well, do you get an oil change every 1,000 miles? Like at the first indication that there's any wear on the drive belt, like, is it swapped out? How often are your brakes serviced? And do you drive only at 60 miles an hour in the right lane of the highway? In the most conservative way possible? And do you have like 3 extra sets of anti-lock brakes on your vehicle? Like, it's just, the analogy doesn't really hold true.
Is there any way to get past that 7 to 9 year environmental permit? You were talking about the Conservative Party cutting through some of the red tape. Is that red tape on the table?
Yeah, so this is a federal issue, and right now we have the Liberal government is in power. They're the ones who created this federal environmental impact assessment, or who updated it and made it quite onerous. So, I mean, of course, these things are political. The thing is, and the irony is, like, even if you wanted to build, say, some new reactors at the Bruce Power Station, like an already approved licensed nuclear site, which has some of the most intensive environmental monitoring in the world. I mean, they're looking at the health of the amphibians on site. They're doing constant sampling, all the time. That site would require 7 to 9 years. We're not just even a brownfield site, for God's sakes. Like, if you were to go and, we used to have North America's largest coal plant. That site that's contaminated with heavy metals, with coal ash and all sorts of things. That site, you would need to take 7 to 9 years to decide about, whether it's environmentally okay to build a zero emissions nuclear power plant. I mean, it's asinine. So yes, I mean, there's nothing written in stone about needing that amount of time for an environmental assessment. And, there's an interesting set of ideas. I think it's Ezra Klein in the States talking about supply side progressivism. Like, there's a real need to, if the climate concerned folks are serious, there's a hell of a lot of red tape standing in the way of building the kind of clean energy infrastructure that's required to do an energy transition, to diffuse the so-called climate bomb. And what stands in the way are environmental regulations a lot of the time. This isn't to say that there's not a role for those kind of processes, but it's gotten completely out of hand.
Yeah, well, I've come to the opinion that most environmentalists don't actually care about the environment. It's about something else. It's they so it's either about degrowth, or it's about their social network, and just playing along with whatever they say. It's like never like an actual like deep study of like what's best net for the environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then so you mentioned new builds. Yeah, do you spend much time with the companies that are doing the refurbishment? Like, have you like gotten to know them?
Yeah, I've developed relationships really throughout the industry, again, with all the major labor unions, but also, a lot of the folks involved in the supply chain. We had the pleasure of visiting BWXT, who have a huge facility in Cambridge, which is banging out the steam generators that Bruce Power requires. They need, I think, 32 steam generators for 4 of their units up in Bruce. They're doing all 8 of their units, but this is an order of around $500 million that goes to the community of Cambridge, which is a city of about 200,000-300,000 people. These are sort of 10 to 15-year contracts, securing high-paying jobs for the steel workers in that case, who are doing the work of assembling and building these steam generators and feeder pipes and things like that. Really a remarkable facility, and actually the only large what is it called again, foreign material exclusion clean room to build this kind of infrastructure surviving in North America. Right, and it's being sustained. Talk about being good for the nuclear industry. It's being sustained by these refurbishment orders. So yeah, I've had the pleasure. Of course, I don't know everybody. It's a massive sector here. We have 76,000 people employed directly by nuclear in Ontario. But yeah, it's yes. I guess the answer is I've met a few people that know more than me.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because I'm curious if you have, or if you could, next time you speak to someone, ask them if you know everything that you need to know to refurbish a plant. Do you also know everything you need to know to build a new one, or at least the critical parts of it? And if so, like, can we not just be content with refurbs, but can we also scale them up to build, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 100 more, like using it, whatever thing that they are doing, the same engineering, the same, a supply chain, the same labor, whatever it is, like, can we do more?
I mean, that's my thesis, Brett. My passion really with the Decouple podcast is to examine and explore what I call the nuclear secret sauce. We know that we have, in many countries around the world, built nuclear plants on budget and on time, and they provide an incredible value and underpin so much of again, what we take for granted. And so, what are those ingredients, and how have we failed, particularly in the West in the 21st century, with the AP1000s and Summer and Vogel, with the EPRs? I mean, thank God the Finns brought their Oikolotto online, but we faced major challenges. And, you don't get a nuclear renaissance coming along every, few years. These are sort of once in a generation opportunities. And we don't have the luxury of screwing it up, quite frankly, right? And I've been rather unimpressed with the discourse and the kind of seriousness that we put into exploring what is that nuclear secret sauce. I don't find there's enough debate. I find there's a lot of sort of top down, this is the party line. We've decided that this is the way we're going. Everybody, row in the same direction. And I'm not sure, again, we're both anthropologists of nuclear coming at this from outside of the industry as we do. But I think Ontario, again, we're the most pro-nuclear political jurisdiction in the world. I think we're the best equipped jurisdiction in the entire Western world as well to build, to have the ingredients of this nuclear secret sauce. So what is that? Many people would jump straight to the conclusion it's the best design in the world, right? And certainly, those are some of the claims. Like the AP1000 was supposed to be incredibly economical, use far less steel and concrete. It was supposed to click together like Lego. That was the original design, I think, was an AP600, and it was supposed to get around economies of scale because of its modularity and being able to snap it together like Lego. Didn't work out so well, So my real thesis is that design is important, but it is not the most important thing, particularly if your industry has been atrophied and not built anything new in a couple decades, right?
Yeah, totally.
We have CANDU, like I do look at the schematics of CANDU and I go, holy shit, the plumbing is insane. We have 380 or 480 of these pressure tubes. There's, pipes feeding each end of those, carrying the heavy water around. It does look like a very complicated reactor when you look at, a PWR or BWR and you just think, man, this thing just looks like a pressure cooker with a bunch of fuel in it. Right. There are obviously huge advantages to CANDU in terms of, the other things we can do, like making medical isotopes, like online refueling, like being able to just use dirt straight out of the ground, unenriched uranium. But the key advantage we have is we have a workforce, as you mentioned, I'd say it's 20 to 30,000 people that are actively involved in the refurbishments who are, again, when we talked about that lived experience, that engineering discipline, that tradesperson discipline of, machining the parts, putting them together, figuring out how they all fit together, gaining familiarity with that, project management, that is at a exceedingly high level, and we're proving it. We're doing our refurbishments on budget, actually below budget, and ahead of schedule. OPG is doing a magnificent job of that at Darlington. So does that equip us to build new CANDUs? I mean, in my opinion, yes. You have that workforce. You also have a supply chain that is banging out these things, banging out these steam generators, banging out these pressure tubes. And the beauty of it all is that it's all happening right here in our backyard. 96% of the supply chain is right here. And we often, compare, I think when utilities are looking to vendors, whose reactor should I build? People come forward with LCOE numbers. Who knows how valid they are? There's a lot of, reactor developers that make some pretty confident claims about, $60 a megawatt, whatever that number is. CANDU might come in a little more expensive. We're not sure yet, but the economic development benefit for Canada and for Ontario in particular is insane.
Yeah,
there's
I've
independent.
I've heard you talk about this
Yeah.
before, and it literally pays for itself, even if it didn't produce electricity.
$1 in, you get $1.40 out. I mean, I don't know if I go quite that far, but it is what I call the ultimate economic stimulus. There's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. And I've got the chance now to visit many of the workplaces, within the supply chain, to meet the men and women that work there, the dignified jobs that are available, the community sustaining jobs, the tax rate sustaining facilities. I mean, and when you compare that, again, Ontario was on this path. The Ontario government made a choice here, and it was, we framed the question as it's gas or nuclear, you Pickering, right? Pickering was the key decision point that needed to be made. But we were sort of sleepwalking into a kind of natural gas path dependency. It's, still the fastest and maybe cheapest thing to build. I mean, the price of gas has caused people to reconsider that a little bit. We currently produce nuclear at about 8 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Gas is priced at 12 to 13 cents per kilowatt hour. But those are rates that were locked in based on prices of, a year or two ago. And we've seen the Henry Hub price, go as high as 5 times what it was 2 years ago. And right now in Ontario, we've marginalized gas only to peaking because we have this incredible baseload capacity with our nuclear and our hydro. But by eliminating 15% of baseload power on our grid, we were going to be burning that gas around the clock, day in, day out. And that gas is getting expensive. And so And the beautiful thing again with refurbishment, there's a great report by the Financial Accountability Office when they were studying the refurbishments at Darlington and Bruce, and they were saying, okay, well, what if the refurbishments go 40% over budget? How does that impact ratepayers? Well, it increases the cents per kilowatt hour by 7%. So you'd go from 9 cents a kilowatt hour, to 9.6 cents per kilowatt hour. That's not nothing, but that's if you go, 40% over budget on your refurbs. We're doing it under budget and ahead of schedule. So, what's missing from this? Obviously, the civil engineering you need for new builds. You need to pour a lot of concrete, a lot of steel. That's not something that maybe we have as much experience as we need. I don't want to say that we're completely equipped to go out and bang out new reactors, but I think that we have a can-do advantage here. And the needs of our grid, particularly in Ontario. Ontario's the largest province in Canada. We're installing a lot of electric arc furnaces at our steel facilities. We're really incentivizing battery electric vehicles. We need a huge amount more power on the grid. We're building the West's first SMR, the X300. That's a great thing. But we have a licensed site with 3 other spots on it, licensed for 4,800 megawatts. And the current plan is to maybe build 1,200 megawatts in the form of 4 X300s. And to me, as much as I think SMRs are awesome and there's an export market and we should be certainly doing one and, doing the first of a kind and getting some of the export business from that, we can't waste those sites. Again, it's going to take 7 to 9 years to get another site just prepped and ready. We're lucky.
Well, and that part just drives me absolutely insane. It makes no sense, especially the example you gave. Like if you put it on an already like toxic, like coal dump, it's like, what do you need to do an environmental impact statement for? This is crazy. Yeah. Okay, but we have limited time, so I want to make sure that you get your messages across. Just because, once again, I've been watching enamored at all the incredible work that you've been doing. Everything from you being in front of Congress to you obviously teaming up with all the other advocates. I follow you on the WhatsApp group. And now these victories. So it's just bump, one after another with you, all while holding down a job as a full-time doctor. Not too shabby. So what other big events or topics do you want to make sure that we cover on our platform also that you're involved in?
Man, I mean, this one just looms so large for me. Obviously we've got a lot more in the pipeline. We're a very ambitious organization.
Yeah, what's next? Oh, but I also want to find time to talk about Diablo because there's still information. I'm gonna get you to have Heather Hoff on or someone from down there because they're gonna be able to deliver the expertise. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what else we have in store in Canada, we have this insane situation where our government has labeled nuclear a sin stock essentially when it comes to green financing. It's the equivalent of tobacco, firearms. Yeah, but I thought Bruce or something issued a private bond that sold out, or there's some story like that, right? That
no, there's So, listen, I mean, obviously we're seeing a huge nuclear renaissance and a pivot back towards nuclear. The renewable sector is hyper capitalized, and GE's their wind division is losing money. All the major wind manufacturers, 7 of 10 of them are already in China. The rest are rapidly moving their manufacturing there because of the prices of commodities. 97% of solar wafers are coming out of China now. It's an area where margins are getting tight for investors, and I think as we're seeing with the uranium bulls, we're seeing a real renewed interest in nuclear, but our country in Canada, a tier 1 nuclear nation, and even our province, Ontario, which is 61% nuclear powered, has a world-class, deeply decarbonized grid. Nuclear is not in our green bond, which is insane.
Come on.
I'm not even kidding you. So you did mention Bruce Power. So, there's a whole bunch of encouraging moves around the world, as you and I have been following closely. In July of this year, the EU finally, after this soap opera production, agreed that nuclear was, qualified to be in the sustainable finance taxonomy. South Korea just 2 weeks ago, with their change in presidential leadership, included nuclear in their green bond. As you mentioned, Bruce Power issued a $500 million bond, which was certified by Cicero, which is a financial institution that looks at these things. It was oversubscribed by 7 times. All of the major banks in Canada, Royal Bank of Canada, Bank of Montreal, Toronto Dominion, have all been releasing very pro-nuclear.
Okay, so it's just got to be a matter of time then. It's just got to be a matter of time till the government switches. It is. Okay, so do we think that we need to do something, or we think
we do though? We do because there's resistance from the people that go and sell. For instance, in Ontario, the reason it's being held up is because I'm blanking on names right now, but essentially the folks who go around the world selling Ontario's debt. are telling the government, listen, if you want to include nuclear in that green bond financing, you're not going to get as good of an interest rate. It's going to cost you an extra $200 million a year. You sure you want to do that? I think that's an untested hypothesis. I don't think that holds true anymore. I think within green finance, there's a hell of a lot of influence from nefarious environmental interests, and I think that may have been true historically 5-10 years ago. But I mean, this is the kind of thing with finance, right? You read the markets, you read the world, and you become a leader, and you take a risk, and you'll have large dividends from it. And so I think in Ontario we're on the cusp. It's going to take a little bit of advocacy, but I think we're going to win that. Federally, it's a lot more challenging because we have a government that is very, I won't give them the dignity of saying they're undecided. They're hostile to nuclear, and they make occasional concessions. And
what are how does the political system work in Canada again? The provinces have a lot of power, right? And then when's the election for the federal government? How does that work? And is the current party going to stay in power, or like? Yeah,
I mean, so we're a federalist country, right? So we have 13 provinces and territories. Oh my God, I might fail. If I had to, I was hanging out with some friends that were studying for their citizenship exam, and you have to know every little weird detail about, now the king of our, we're a constitutional monarchy, for God's sake. So our head of state is actually King Charles.
Oh, okay. Back from England times.
Yeah, no, he's still our head of state.
Does he go on your money? Does he go on your money?
His face isn't on the money, but when we form government, we need permission from the Governor General. It's usually pretty symbolic, and it's almost always given. Wow. We're a weird country, man. We're the only country in the northern hemisphere that, or in the western hemisphere, really, that didn't, evict didn't become a republic, essentially.
Even the little island nations in the Caribbean have kicked.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like us and Belize are in that category. Maybe Jamaica, I'm not sure. Anyway, there's provincial jurisdictions and federal jurisdictions. We just had our provincial election. As I mentioned, they won a pretty crushing supermajority, stripped away 9 seats from the traditional party of Labour, and that was largely, again, because they lost private sector skilled tradespeople. That's traditionally those folks vote for the left, and the left has become, in Canada and many places around the world, the party of the urban chattering class, the urban elite, completely out of touch, sort of tinged by environmentalism and degrowth, and not a party that I think skilled trades put their confidence in.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. Yeah.
So that's delivered that supermajority provincially, but federally it's a little more complex. And who knows? Our next election is probably going to be in 2025. I'm hoping that the governing party comes to their senses before then. But yeah.
Okay, so it's still a while out. So nothing in the next couple of years will really change on the federal level, you're thinking?
Yeah.
But maybe we can plan for a few years. I mean, it's your business, not mine, but well, you can plan, I guess, because if that's when everything is being timed, and I mean, things are only going to get worse with the energy situation for the next couple of years anyway. So maybe it'll create a forcing function for them to either re-examine their hostility towards nuclear or get kicked out of office.
Well, listen. I mean, I think what happened provincially with a populist right-wing government forging a new alliance with not all of Labour. Don't get me wrong. Again, teachers and nurses, for instance, have not been treated particularly well by this government and are very hostile to this government. But the political right doesn't need to win all of Labour, right? They need to win pockets of it in order to, add that into their overall alliance. That's very much on the wall for the governing Liberal Party. We have a new, very right-wing populist conservative leader in Pierre Poilievre. And there's a very real risk for the Liberals that he could do something similar to Doug Ford. And already has very strong support in regional areas, particularly kind of rural, underdeveloped areas in the country, but needs to break through in Ontario. And if he can strip seats away from the Liberals by courting that element of the working class, those private sector skilled trades unions, that's a real risk. So I think in the end, sometimes I used to think in the past, fall into the delusion that politicians made decisions based upon, values and climate change and this, that, and the other. Nah, they make decisions based upon the pragmatics, and nothing is more pragmatic to a politician than potentially losing their seat or losing their government. So I think there is an interesting opportunity. I think there is hope that this government will come to its senses and certainly, make a pivot as the rest of the world is really doing towards nuclear.
Yep. Okay, and as we kind of come to a conclusion here, you mentioned the rest of the world. Give me your take on the rest of the world and what's happening, what you like, what you don't like. I know that's a big question, but you having perspective, you talk to a lot of people. So this is one of the few opportunities I have to like hear from you and get an update. Like, what is Chris Keefer's like worldview with nuclear, obviously? Like, what is your worldview? How is it being shaped and transforming over time?
Well, it is so interesting, podcasting. I have my sort of, how do I put this? Like, it's kind of like I have sensors, in various places around the world because I have this like wonderful, I'm always bringing on new guests, but I have a lot of returning guests as well. And that gives me a perspective on the world. I think it's really important to acknowledge in our modern world, where what we see is so determined by the algorithm and other things, that we're all operating with really imperfect information. I do feel really blessed and have a lot of trust for the people that I've brought on, folks like Doomberg, folks like Noah Retberg, Mark Nelson, Adam Blazowski, most recently with the Nord Stream incident. I think one of my big reflections is that this time of kind of energy bounty, of fossil fuel plenty, was just this time of utter delusion when a kind of vampire form of energy like wind and solar could sort of prosper off of the cream of this overflowing milk jug of energy, right? And the fact that the Germans finally came to their senses and are not keeping those 2 nuclear plants in reserve, which doesn't even work, I guess, in terms of the reactor physics of, largely a spent core, taking it offline and then maybe bringing it back on. It just wasn't going to work. Listen to Noah Retberg, one of my previous episodes there to get more on that. It took the Nord Stream pipelines either being blown up. I've read something interesting about, potentially the Russians just did such a poor job on maintenance that some big, methane hydrate led to a rupture. Who knows? But anyway, it took the collapse of that vital artery for them to Russia to finally say, fuck, we're going to have to run these reactors at least to April. We won't shut them down. Right. And if it was sabotage and you start thinking about, well, is major energy infrastructure sort of in play as a geopolitical lever, as a lever in, war, there's a lot of other pipelines. I mean, it's amazing looking at those spiderweb maps coming out of Norway. What would the implications be? And I think that people are thinking about that. And all of a sudden, it's absolutely insane to even consider shutting down a nuclear plant. If you're not living in that bounty of fossil fuel plenty, of course you treasure your nuclear plants for everything that they're worth. The huge hypocrisy is that the people who are most concerned about climate change and vilify fossil fuels were the ones that were most willing and keen and eager and enthusiastic to shut off this vital source of power. So that's a big reflection. Adam Blazowski, people should check out that episode. It's our Nord Stream episode. We got it out on the day of the incident, whatever it was. I guess sabotage is the dominant theory. But he had a great statement on the podcast, which was, all of the things like energy security, like being able to, keep your house warm for your kids, having the bare necessities are just the absolute, the necessity that enables all these, like, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like our concern about biodiversity and the beauty of nature is meaningless if we're cold, because we will go and cut down all the trees in the park to heat our homes. And that sounds like it's happening. I mean, Adam talked about someone, I think he'd seen someone in Poland, like going to their local park and cutting one of the trees up for firewood. And I mean, I imagine that sort of thing.
When you're desperate, all these things are on the table. Yeah.
So I mean, those are a few of my reflections. I think nuclear is on the rise. I think fossil fuels are going to remain. This crisis is not ending anytime soon. It's very interesting seeing how that's being handled. I won't pretend to have a ton of expertise in that area, but certainly the response to Putin's pipeline wars was not, well, let's just increase supply and drive down price and bankrupt Putin. It was, let's continue on with a fairly contradictory process here of suppressing investment in fossil fuels. It's, I think, about $300 billion a year just to sort of maintain current production, and we've been sort of down to about $150 billion a year after year. And so, there's no surprise. There's a fossil fuel shortage. I think it's absolutely shocking, and one of the greatest sort of moral crimes of the Germans is outbidding everybody else for the remaining LNG and coal in the world. in the third world countries that are going to be blacked out or potentially starving because of that. I mean, there's a lot to comment on, Brett, but those are, I guess, the thoughts that rise to the surface based upon the intel that I have from around the world, and I'm very lucky to have it thanks to the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll wrap up then, encouraging everyone to go and check out your podcast too, the Decouple podcast. I'm sure you can find it everywhere. Chris, thanks for coming on our show. Amazing everything you do. Like I truly watch with admiration, like week by week. So thank you from me and everybody else. And now go off and save some lives at a hospital.
And I'm starting to be a little bit better at the hustle here. Canadians for Nuclear Energy achieved this great victory, and we had to pay people to help us with that. Namely Dylan Moon of Nuclear Vision, who is the guy who pulled that report together. And so we have a big donation button on our website, Canadians for Nuclear Energy, c4ne.ca. Even if you're international, what's good for nuclear in Canada is good for nuclear in the States, is good for nuclear around the world. So, if you do like our work, we would, I'm actually asking for your support. So I'll just leave with that. Trying to work that into my messaging these days, because it has been amazing seeing what we've been capable of, and I deeply care about changing the world for the better, and we just did that right here in Ontario.
Awesome. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers, all the best.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.